Hello and welcome back to TICKER Cyber, where we are here to encourage you to get on top of your cybersecurity by building cyber fitness into your home and business. And joining me today is Susie Jones from Cinch Security. Welcome to you.
Hi Mike, how are you?
Doing well, all things considered. Now, what are we going to be touching on in today's episode? You've sent me some great points today.
Yeah, so I'll talk through the new USA, UK, Australia alliance and what it means for cybersecurity as well as small businesses right across the country. I also have a guest here today, Ben Doyle, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for APAC for TELUS Australia and New Zealand. So he's a guest to discuss all the emerging security innovations and where they're coming from. And finally, we'll talk through small businesses and what they need to be doing to ready themselves to respond to supply chain cyber questions, because more and more questions are coming through from big customers to small business suppliers, and there's a lot of things that they need to be thinking about.
Awesome. All right, guys, and before we get started, just a reminder that even though Cinch Security is the presenting sponsor of today's program, all the views and opinions in our discussion are, of course, our own. Now, Susie, we saw a big new alliance of sorts was announced last week, and it's got wide-ranging ramifications that reach from submarines and into cybersecurity. Can you give us a rundown of what this might mean on a broader scale, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a bit of a summary, Australia, the United States and Britain jointly announced last week a new trilateral security partnership known as AU-KUS or AUKUS. US President Joe Biden said that there were three countries would be sharing advanced technologies in a working group. And this means that Britain, Australia and the US going to be working together, and they have said that it is to counter moves by China. So it's quite a bold statement that's been made. The AUKUS working group will enable the three countries to share information in areas including artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, quantum computing, and underwater systems and long-range strike capabilities. So there's a number of interesting things to come out of this, especially potential future cybersecurity opportunities. That makes me really happy to have here today Ben Doyle from TELUS Australia. Not least has he been for the last 18 years the ANZ Chief Information Security Officer for one of the biggest defence prime contractors in TELUS Australia and New Zealand. But he's also an active mentor for various different programs with emerging technologies, startups, etc., coming out of cybersecurity. So I'm really looking forward to hearing his thoughts on what some of the new technologies coming out in the sector and what's got him excited.
Fantastic. Well, let's bring Ben Doyle from TELUS Australia into the show. How are you today?
Very good, Mike. Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so Susie touched on it. There's some pretty exciting things you've worked on, and you've undertaken a few projects with small businesses in your supply chain. How do you view the cyber risks going on at the moment that you've seen?
So I guess when I look at, especially in small businesses where it affects TELUS's operations, it tends not to be the traditional view of trying to protect TELUS's information we may pass on. But actually, what gets missed a lot of the times is the importance of the business continuity of having that supply chain available at any point. So when I look at how I support the small businesses, it's about what I can do to ensure that, given the broad range of threats, especially over the last 24 months with the rise of ransomware, how I can support them being more resilient to those threats. So as a company in TELUS Australia, we make some fairly unique products and services for our customers in Australia, and we depend on basically some very unique Australian small businesses to help us develop those and supply those capabilities. So if one of those companies were interrupted by a cyber threat or a cyber incident, or worse, go out of business, that could actually have a significant impact for us from a business point of view. And that's why I tend to take a lens of the resilience and business continuity more so than the information, because to be honest, we don't share that much information with our supply chain that it would be more sensitive, if you like, in that nature, just because of the nature of our business. I think a lot of that time that gets missed by a lot of large organizations, the importance of the small businesses, but the stats actually show a different, view when you actually look at it on how important small businesses are to large organizations. In Australia, 97.4% of businesses have less than 20 employees. The other side of that is there's only 0.2% of businesses in Australia that have more than 200 employees. So there's a very different dichotomy. So the large organisations in Australia can't exist without small businesses. And that's why it's so important that we actually take care of those small businesses.
Yeah, it's like it's a symbiotic relationship, I sort of understand is what you're saying. But Susie,
Correct.
It sounds as though this isn't just about software supply chains then, but about the broader supply chain. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm unpacking that well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely correct. So whilst Australia's Cybersecurity Centre's threat report last week spoke a lot about the software supply chain, it really does come down to, you know, those businesses that are supplying the widgets that go into, you know, the tanks or whatever it might be. And that's why it's so fantastic to see the likes of Ben and his team at TELUS really working on their community obligations to build and improve the cyber fitness right across the entire supply chain and ecosystems, because a supply chain is only ever as strong as its weakest link. So if small businesses aren't on top of things, either will the big businesses in the end. So it's really fantastic to see the likes of TELUS and many other large organisations across the country thinking about their supply chain in a very different way to the way it has been in the past. There's no clear black and white definition between a customer and a supplier when you're thinking about cybersecurity and the cyber world. There's so many different ways that the success of one organisation is dependent on the success and continued security of the other as well. So it's really fantastic to see a real shift in the way that organisations of all sizes are starting to think about securing a supply chain collectively, rather than, you know, your traditional, I'm a customer, you must do what I say, and I'm a supplier and I'll just sell you this widget.
And it's that collective stance that really puts this sort of conversation at the forefront. But Ben, when it comes to technology sharing amongst the US, Australia and the UK, technology accelerators and startups generally are likely to play a big part, as far as I understand. As an advisor in this sector, you must see some pretty cool things. Can you tell us what you're most excited about based on what we've seen?
So probably it's just from a convenience point of view. So one of the accelerators in Australia that I work quite closely with is Cyrise, and Cinch actually came through that accelerator a couple of years ago. They've just finished their recent cohort. So if I touch on a couple of those cohort members that have come out of there that I've actually find quite interesting, different avenues. So we have a company called DroneSec, which are looking at doing pen tests on drones. So where are the phase, where are the risks actually in the technology on drones, as well as doing threat intelligence around drones. So do we know what about operators in drones in certain areas and things like that? That's actually quite unique and haven't seen that done before. From a small business point of view, there's actually an interesting company there called Byte25, which is actually doing a hardware cyber product to look at network visibility as well as cyber defense, which is quite interesting. And they've had quite a lot of success up into Southeast Asia already in terms of that. And just on a different flip, to look at what we see and have seen in the news quite a bit, and affects small businesses quite a lot in terms of business email compromise, invoice fraud. There's a company there called TrialD, which is actually looking at the processing of invoice and trying to protect that from those email compromises and invoice frauds that we actually see quite a bit through the small business chains.
It's interesting. What do you make of the crypto space at the moment, just off the cuff? I think the worry that people are starting to have as cryptocurrencies become more and more mainstream is the security behind them. Have you seen anything in that space? Ben, it just popped into my mind.
I saw an interesting flip, I think it was 2 cohorts back, on a company called Tide. And it wasn't per se in terms of protecting crypto information. It was actually using blockchain and crypto to almost create a market space for end users to sell their private information and to be able to track the permissions on who can on-sell their private information. That was actually quite a unique, I guess, adaptation of crypto technology, which I actually really enjoyed, but I haven't seen anything develop out of that yet.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on it. But Susie, just to wrap us up with this conversation, what do you think the impact to small businesses are from the new partnership announced last week, other than the submarines and the French being upset?
Look, I think there's a couple of things to be mindful of for small businesses. So first of all, when you do continue to agitate nations such as China, it's fair to say that you do put a larger target on your back, and that means that every organisation operating here in Australia potentially does have a larger cyber target on their back, and so therefore time is running out for them to get on top of their cyber security. But there's also immense opportunities tied up in arrangements like this. So Australia has traditionally had quite close ties with both the USA and Britain, and so they will obviously continue that tie. But that also means that there's potentially a lot of opportunities to work in the supply chains in future projects as more of these innovations come about, as there's more collective working together to solve these problems and to improve security as a nation and as a tripartite alliance. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, even if it does mean that in the meantime there's still a big risk. And it's also really careful and important to note that it's not just China that's attacking. Every country is attacking every other country, unfortunately. Even just last week, we did see in Melbourne, there were 6 men that were arrested for running a very large scam that has been targeting Victorians, well, actually Australians, for the last couple of years. So we're not innocent either, and it just goes to show for small businesses, you really do just need to do everything you can to protect your business from anybody who shouldn't be getting in there.
Well, I was just going to ask on that point, is it true that Aussies are getting amongst the cyber criminals more than ever before? We often see perpetrators coming from overseas, but what can we look to understand with Australians who are actually attacking home soil in many ways?
Look, I think it's fair to say that's always been the case. As long as there has been crime, every nation around the world has had criminals in that space. Particularly now, they're estimating by next year that cybercrime globally will actually be a larger trade than the drug trade. So, when you're talking about multi-trillion-dollar industry, there unfortunately are going to be criminals based in every country. That's just the way it is. I wouldn't say that there's more or less, and in fact, most of the time we don't know where the criminals are. So it's more important to focus on what you can do to protect yourself than worrying about where the bad guys are sitting.
They could be right in front of you. I've been hacking right as we've been recording this program. Just kidding. Guys,
we're totally happy with that, Mike. There's no way.
It was blocked by Cinch Security, though. I was absolutely handled. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the program today and having a discussion with us. And it's all very interesting times ahead, especially with this new alliance. And Ben, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Easy done. And guys, we do not condone cyber hacks, just saying. Of course, today's chat was presented by the team over at Cinch Security, and if you'd like to learn more, head over to the website to find out how Cinch will keep you on top of today's threats so that your business will continue to grow tomorrow. It's super important, especially with where we're at the moment moving online. I'm Mike Loader. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you again soon. Be well.